Exactly at 6:17 in the morning, an unbelievable scene appeared on the streets of Ouagadougou. 5 gigantic trucks covered in dust were slowly entering the city. Behind those trucks were 50 prisoners, hands tied, heads bowed, steps heavy with shame. Among them were 4 white men, dressed in suits yet smeared with dirt. At the very front, President Ibrahim Traore marched forward with his chest out like a lion. As soon as he stopped, he uttered only 5 words. "These are Africa's thieves." People still could not understand the meaning of the scene. For a few moments, complete silence prevailed. Then, as if someone broke the spell, eyes widened, tongues began to move. Some lifted their children onto their shoulders, some pulled out their phones, and some simply broke into tears. But this did not happen suddenly. The echo of this storm had come from the dense forest 2 days earlier, where a secret had been buried that had been tearing the earth for years to extract treasure. In the northern forests of Burkina Faso, where hardly anyone goes, a secret mining network had been running for many years. No government permission was taken, no concern for the environment was shown. Only the roar of machines, the cover of night, and plunder in silence. From that place, gold was being extracted and silently shipped to Europe, and the nation had no idea. The village elders had always felt something strange. They had seen trucks that came at night but vanished by morning. Sometimes they heard the sound of explosions. Sometimes they saw strange lights. When anyone complained, local officials either threatened them or said it was a government secret. People grew afraid and they stayed silent. But there was one man who refused to remain silent. An old villager named Isaka, in the final years of his life, but with the fire of youth still in his heart, had seen the wealth of his generations being looted before his eyes. He decided he would not remain quiet any longer, yet he knew he could not do it alone. He called upon his young grandson, Bilal. Bilal was an intelligent, active, and fearless young man who always took his grandfather's words seriously. "My son Bilal, what is happening here is plunder. If you can reach the capital and deliver this message to the president, perhaps our generations can be saved." In Isaka's eyes was a prayer, and on Bilal's shoulders, the weight of responsibility. Without any delay, Bilal set off. He walked for 2 days, sometimes hitching rides on trucks, sometimes enduring thirst, sometimes sacrificing sleep. At last, when he reached Ouagadougou, he stood directly outside the presidential palace. Guards pushed him away, but he did not move. "I must meet the president. This is a matter of my homeland." The spark in Bilal's eyes could not be ignored. Finally, one army officer listened to him. He took Bilal to a serious official who heard all the details and immediately reported to President Ibrahim Traore. When the president heard that illegal mining was taking place in the forests, that foreign elements were involved, and that the nation's wealth was being stolen and smuggled abroad, a deep seriousness settled on his face. He immediately canceled all meetings and said only one sentence: "We leave tonight. No noise, no mercy." These were the words of President Ibrahim Traore, always known for his speed and decisiveness in action. Night had not yet fully fallen when a silent yet highly trained military convoy departed from the capital, Ouagadougou. The truck's headlights were off, the soldiers quietly took their positions, and the convoy was personally led by President Traore himself. With him was his most loyal and trusted force, used only for the most dangerous missions. Meanwhile, drones were already in the sky. Their cameras recorded everything happening on the ground. Deep inside the forest, 5 large trucks were seen being loaded with gold. The presence of foreigners was clear, white men giving quiet orders in French accents. They held satellite phones, and around them stood African guards dressed in black uniforms. President Traore observed the scene through binoculars, and then in the simplest words, gave his commander the order: "Encircle, seize, arrest." Those words struck like lightning. Within moments, soldiers had surrounded the area from all directions. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire echoed through the air, but it was only a warning shot. The truck drivers panicked. Some tried to reverse, some tried to speed away, but every route was already blocked. The guards in black uniforms resisted for a while, but when they were surrounded, they too were forced to lay down their weapons. Within 7 minutes, all 50 individuals had been arrested. Not a single one escaped. Among those prisoners were 4 French agents who had been presented locally as engineers, but their equipment and behavior had made the truth clear. From their phones were recovered satellite maps, secret communication records, and numerous suspicious call logs. President Traore himself stepped forward and pointed toward the first truck. "Remove the cover." When the soldier lifted the tarp, the scene inside was astonishing. Beneath deep black plastic sheets, neatly stacked gold bars lay, as if they were part of some national treasury, but smuggled here in secret. He immediately ordered all the trucks to be checked. In the second truck, there was more gold. In the third were wooden crates stamped with the logos of French mining companies. Some crates had been spray painted to hide their identity, but the markings were still clear. The president looked toward his officers and said, "This time we will hide nothing. We will show this to the entire nation." He ordered that all the trucks be cleaned, refueled, and prepared to move toward Ouagadougou before sunrise. The purpose was clear: to show the people the truth that had been hidden from their eyes for years. The president not only recovered the stolen gold, but also devised a complete plan. Tomorrow morning, these trucks will pass through the main roads of Ouagadougou. The prisoners will walk behind them, and every citizen will see who was stealing their gold. That very night, the atmosphere of Ouagadougou felt changed. Soldiers were quietly deploying at different points in the city. People knew something unusual was about to happen, but what? It was still unknown. The streets were restless, but there was no fear, only a strange sense of anticipation. And amid this unease, the morning began to rise. The light of dawn had not fully spread when an unusual hustle began in the streets of Ouagadougou. People started leaving their homes. Some spread mats on the roads. Some climbed onto shop rooftops. Some carried their children in search of higher ground. Everyone was asking one question: what is happening? All night long, military vehicles had thundered through. The city's entrances had been sealed. And now this unexpected commotion? Something great was about to unfold. Finally, at 5:45, a sound echoed, the soft rumble of tires, and then the very sight no one had imagined, even in their dreams for decades. 5 colossal trucks, their bodies gleaming, slowly entering the city. Behind each of them walked the prisoners captured the night before. Their hands were tied, their heads bowed, their faces smeared with dust. Among them were the 4 white men, dressed in expensive suits, now reduced to common prisoners, covered in dirt. The atmosphere of the city seemed to freeze for a moment. Then an old woman cried out, "This is our gold!" From another side, a young man's voice roared, "These are our enemies!" And then chants broke out. Drones soared in the sky. Reporters rushed in. Children climbed onto swings and rooftops, and some people burst into uncontrollable tears. The convoy was led by none other than President Ibrahim Traore himself. He walked silently alone at the front. No bodyguards, no protocol, no cameras with him. His resolve and certainty were the true power of that moment. In his eyes there was no fear, only the light of truth. When the convoy stopped in front of the National Assembly, the people stopped as well. Silence spread through the air. The president climbed onto the roof of a truck. A faint dust swirled in the air, and rays of the sun reflected off the gold. The president pointed toward the truck behind him, then at the prisoners, and spoke. "For years, these people have looted us in darkness by taking advantage of false agreements, corruption, and our silence. But today, we have brought the truth into the light. These are not our guests, they are our enemies." For a moment, the air fell silent, then a storm of slogans rose. "Long live the president! Give us back our gold! Punish the traitors!" Voices came from every direction. The president took an envelope from his pocket. He raised it into the air and said, "This contains the names of those who, sitting inside our own country, were selling our gold. This is not only an external conspiracy, this is internal betrayal." People's eyes fixed on that envelope. Everyone was thinking, who will be on that list? Will those we consider heroes turn out to be traitors? The prisoners were seated on the ground in front of the trucks filled with gold. Women spat at them, men pointed fingers and shouted. A young girl cried out, "These are the people who sold our future." The president looked at those prisoners and said only this, Now your story ends here, and the beginning of our justice starts from here. After President Ibrahim Traore's words, the crowd fell silent. The sun had fully risen, and in its light, the envelope the president held gleamed. It was not just a piece of paper, but a mirror that would reveal the faces that had been hidden behind curtains for years. The president quietly stepped down from the truck. Two senior officers accompanied him. They took the envelope and entered the National Assembly building, where an emergency session had been convened. In the assembly hall, ministers, generals, and senior officials of government agencies were present. Media representatives, international observers, and public delegates sat in their seats waiting anxiously. The president placed the envelope on the table, took a sip of water, and after a deep breath said, "These are not just names. These are the wounds of the nation. The only balm for these wounds is the truth, and that truth will be revealed today." He opened the envelope and pulled out 12 names. With each name was listed the position and the details of the crime. The first name was read aloud: Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, issuing fake mining licenses, providing secret routes to foreign companies. The second name, General Ubaid, corruption in border security, aiding the safe movement of criminals. The third, National Export Director, issuing fake certificates to legitimize gold exports. One by one the names were announced, and the walls of the assembly hall seemed to tremble. Some people glanced sideways, some foreheads were drenched in sweat, and tears began to flow from the eyes of certain ministers. One officer even bowed his head and began to cry right there in his chair. His name was fourth on the list. The president did not stop speaking. He announced, "All of them will be arrested before this evening. Whoever runs will be considered a traitor. Whoever surrenders to the law will be given full opportunity to defend themselves. But forgiveness? That will not be granted now." At that moment, a military officer rushed in and whispered something into the president's ear. With a look of displeasure, the president informed the assembly, "The Minister of Energy has fled the country. He crossed the border in a vehicle with fake diplomatic plates." Silence descended over the hall once again. Everyone realized this matter was not only internal, but had spread to the international level. The president said, "This is the same person who treated the nation's treasure as his own vault. Now he has fled, but remember, we will go after him." At that moment, news arrived that another named official had fled to Ivory Coast and applied for political asylum, while a third person had departed for France on a private jet. The president immediately issued orders: freeze all their bank accounts, confiscate properties, and file warrants in international courts. No criminal will be safe now. That same night, the president addressed the nation directly. His face was stern, his voice confident, and the message undeniable. 3 have fled, and that proves they are guilty. But hear this: no border is strong enough to hide from the truth. We will bring them all back. With that, he began to read the list aloud to the public. One name after another, one crime after another. Sensation spread across the country. Some people screamed, some turned off the TV while crying, and one person fainted on the spot. His brother was among those 12 names. As President Traore began to read the names loudly from the list, an unusual silence spread through the entire nation. In homes, shops, hotels, even in mosques and churches, people held their breath and stared at their TV screens. These were not merely names of traitors, they were the faces of those who had sold the nation's trust, and today they were being exposed. And then the moment came that made everyone's hair stand on end. When the president read the 12th name, a reporter shouted, "That is the Minister of Information." The same person who used to stand beside the president at every national speech, smiling at the camera and chanting slogans of truth, was today revealed as one of the country's greatest deceivers. As soon as the president completed the list, chaos erupted in the entire assembly hall. Some ministers rose from their seats and ran out. Some started speaking in defense, and some were so motionless it was as if they had taken root in the ground. At that moment, the president said, "He who is silent now is complicit. Whoever tries to flee will be considered a criminal. Every deal made against the nation will be accounted for." The assembly session was adjourned. Military personnel locked the doors, and the 5 individuals whose names were on the list and who were present in the building were immediately taken into custody. Some resisted, but the president's order was clear. Anyone who resists will be treated as an enemy, not a minister. That day became an unforgettable day for the nation, but it was only the beginning of justice. The next morning, when the nation woke expecting a major arrest or further revelations, an explosion shattered everything. In the third watch of the night, a government building in Ouagadougou, the central office of the Investigative Commission, was rocked by a powerful blast. Glass shattered and flew, cracks appeared in the walls, and flames leapt into the air. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but the message was clear. We will not sit quietly. Security agencies sprang into action, surveillance of all sensitive buildings was increased, and President Traore's security was tripled. At the same time, the president told his special advisor, "This attack was not only on BRICS, it was on the state. Now we must fight this war not only in court, but in the streets and offices as well." The president immediately issued a new decree. Form a high-level joint commission. It will include foreign observers, honest judges, and loyal military officers. This commission will expose every name, every link, and every international hand behind the gold theft. Over the next few days, the commission worked day and night. Interrogations were held with the arrested officers, data was extracted from the phones and laptops of the French agents, and the most shocking revelation came when secret bank records arrived from Dubai, Switzerland, and Panama. They recorded transfers of millions of dollars paid to Burkina Faso's ministers and officers. A corrupt officer's account showed a transfer of $500,000 only a week earlier with a note, "Final delivery before route change." That phrase shook everyone. This was no ordinary theft. It was an international network funneling Africa's resources to Europe undercover. But the president said only, "There is no way back now. We will go to the end, no matter how powerful the enemy may be." With President Ibrahim Traore's words, the entire system became even more alert. The Investigative Commission accelerated its inquiries and now had in hand documents that exposed not just betrayal within Burkina Faso, but a major international scheme. One file in particular stunned everyone. This file had leaked from Ivory Coast Customs Department. It contained details of 2 trucks loaded with gold that were to be passed through the country via a special protected corridor. The trucks' numbers, fake names of the drivers, and security clearances were all listed. There was a red stamp, approved for diplomatic passage. This was irrefutable proof that not only certain Burkina Faso officials, but also high authorities in Ivory Coast were equally complicit in the crime. When the president read this information, his eyes sharpened. He immediately ordered, "We will go there ourselves. If their institutions are playing games with us, they must answer to the people." Within a few hours, a special delegation was prepared. The president temporarily vested a senior general with authority in his place and personally crossed the border with a covert but fully armed mission. This mission included only trusted officers, legal experts, and international observers. When the delegation arrived at the Ivory Coast border station, the first reaction was hesitation and surprise. Local authorities tried to stop them, but when they were shown international warrants, evidence, and observers, they fell silent. The border checkpoint was searched, fake papers, stamped approvals, and photographs were found showing gold being unloaded from those very trucks into a warehouse controlled by a private company. The owner of the warehouse was listed as Marseille Ventures Limited, a company registered in Panama with financial records in Dubai, Switzerland, and France. Without wasting time, the president ordered the immediate arrest of 3 officers present there. Under intense pressure, one of them confessed that for months they had been sending 2 gold trucks across the border every month. In return, they received cash, vehicles, and property. When news of these arrests reached the Ivorian government, uproar broke out. They lodged strong protests, calling it a violation of sovereignty. On state TV, the Minister of Interior declared, "Burkina Faso has acted illegally within our borders, and we condemn this." But the truth could no longer be suppressed. International media broadcast the documents and photographic evidence. On the internet, the hashtag #GoldGateAfrica began trending. Public opinion split in both countries. Some praised President Traore's courage, while others felt ashamed of the neighboring government's disgrace. Meanwhile, the situation in Ouagadougou was worsening. Hidden conspiracies against the president were now in motion. His close ally, General Ousmane, warned him, "Mr. President, these people will not only steal gold, they can take lives. Your safety can no longer rest only in the hands of guards." But Traore replied only, "When a leader stands for truth, he cannot be frightened by bullets." With that, he began preparations to return. But this time, he was not returning alone. He carried with him the prisoners, the evidence, and the heavy weight of truth. Yet he knew the real battle was still ahead. When President Ibrahim Traore returned to Ouagadougou with his delegation and evidence, the atmosphere of the city felt different. The people were in the streets to welcome him, but within the halls of power, a quiet unease spread. Many offices were shut, ministers had limited their activities, and an unusual silence hovered over government buildings. It felt as if the enemy was no longer outside but sitting inside, silently preparing to strike. The investigative commission had now completed its findings from bank records, call logs, and border documents. They proved that not only ministers, but also some media houses, members of civil society, and officials in defense institutions were part of the network. A list was compiled naming those who had taken bribes to suppress news, spread false statements, or deliberately pushed misleading narratives to present the gold theft as legal export. During this tense time, another shock struck. The president's spokesman, long considered his closest ally, suddenly resigned. He was accused of leaking information from internal meetings to foreign investors, warning them in advance. The matter was no longer limited to mistrust. Some ministers began securing preemptive bail from the courts to protect themselves. Others secretly sent their wives and children abroad. It was as if everyone knew that the storm had already arrived, and no one could remain safe from it. President Traore took his next step with caution. He made high-level changes across all sensitive institutions. A new chief of staff, a new secretary of defense, and a new attorney general were appointed, each one among those who had shown integrity from the very first day of the scandal. But on the other hand, another front had opened, the battlefield of the media. Some major news channels suddenly began criticizing the president. They claimed he was intoxicated with power and that his actions had become a threat to national security. Even an international organization issued a statement saying that human rights violations are taking place in Burkina Faso. It was at that moment the president gathered his cabinet and said, "This noise always rises when the truth begins to surface. But now we will neither bow down nor stop." In that meeting, it was decided that all investigations would now be made public. Every piece of evidence, every video, every audio would be shown to the nation. For this purpose, a daily 1-hour special program was launched on national television, where the commission's reports were presented to the people, evidence was displayed, and questions were answered. This move restored the people's confidence, but it also intensified the internal battle. One minister resigned, distancing himself, and took refuge in a foreign embassy. Some officials submitted fake medical reports and went on extended leave. It seemed as though the poisonous tree whose roots President Traore had cut was now spreading venom in its last breath. But he knew. The price of truth is always loneliness, conspiracy, and sacrifice. But the nation that saves its truth saves everything. After President Traore's announcement, as soon as the doors of the national courts opened, a new wave swept through Burkina Faso. Those who for years had made decisions in closed rooms, taken bribes, and auctioned off the nation's resources were now being brought to public courts in handcuffs. Media houses, international news channels, and human rights organizations had all gathered in Ouagadougou to witness this historic moment. In front of the cameras at the courthouse doors, the scene was nothing short of a revolution. First came the 4 French agents, dressed in clean suits, but with faces marked by shame and defeat. Behind them were the powerful ministers and officials of Burkina Faso, once considered the architects of the nation, now standing as criminals in the dock. As they entered the court, silence fell. President Traore was present himself, not as a plaintiff, but as the representative of the people, a guardian who had come to secure justice for his nation. The judge opened the case with these words: "This trial is not about any individual, institution, or government. It is a battle between justice and betrayal. The nation has been robbed, and now the robbers must answer. The first witness was a former smuggler, granted amnesty under state protection during the investigations. He testified in court about how gold smuggling had operated as a formal system. Truck numbers were cleared in advance, border officers were sent secret messages, and bribes were paid before every journey. During his testimony, panic spread across many faces in the courtroom. Then came a video showing a former minister sitting in a hotel room with French agents, discussing the gold route and bribe amounts. That video elevated the case to a whole new level. Silence gripped the court. The minister, standing in the dock with his head bowed, no longer had a spark left in his eyes. After that, a former private secretary testified that he had personally overheard a conversation at a VIP dinner, where it was said that the gold would be transferred to France under the name of development aid. As his statement was recorded, a journalist stood up in the courtroom and shouted, "This is a new form of colonialism." At that moment, President Traore held up a paper on which was written, "The colonialism of 2025 is not done with cannons or flags, but with fake contracts, silent transfers, and the signatures of internal traitors." Everyone in the courtroom fell silent hearing these words. For the world, those words rang like a bell. Those who had always considered Africa silent were now hearing its voice roar like a scream. On the third day of the trial, thousands of people had gathered outside the court. They held banners reading, "Our gold, our pride, punish the traitors. President Traore, our hope." Before announcing the verdict, the court summoned the final round of witnesses. Some provided additional secret files, others begged forgiveness before the court. But now the decision was about to write history. The judge declared, "Justice is not only about punishment, it is also about reform. But when a crime runs so deep that it reaches the roots of the earth, then it can only be cleansed by fire." And then the sentences were handed down. Long prison terms for ministers, full confiscation of property, the French agents to be handed over to the international court, and fines against media outlets complicit in false reporting. This ruling became a precedent not only for Burkina Faso, but for the entire African continent. Under President Traore's leadership, the nation was now protecting its truth, its resources, and its dignity with its own hands. The historic judgment gave all of Burkina Faso new energy. For President Ibrahim Traore, it was a victory of law, of morality, and of national honor. The people rejoiced, dancing in the streets, offering prayers, and chanting slogans. President Traore, our shield, had become the national chorus. But in that moment of victory, the enemy was not quietly accepting defeat. Just 3 days after the sentencing, the air of Ouagadougou shook with another tragedy. At night, near the president's residence, a car bomb exploded. Thanks to the vigilance of the guards, the president was safe. But one of his closest advisors, Colonel Fode, also his childhood friend, was killed instantly. His body fell at the president's feet, and for the first time, Traore closed his eyes and looked to the sky. The wounds were no longer just physical. They now cut deep into the heart. Colonel Fode was the one who had first delivered Bilal's message to the president, who had uncovered the gold theft, who had prepared the operation. He was not just an officer. He was the architect of the movement. His death silenced the president, but only for moments. The next morning, as he opened the window of his chamber and looked out at the marches in the city, he simply said, "If they wanted to break my spirit, they should know that my spirit has now become the people." That very day, the investigative commission presented new reports. They revealed that the group behind the bombing had been financed by an unknown international NGO linked to a former French ambassador, the very ambassador who had signed these so-called modern mining agreements, and who for years had hidden colonial ambitions under the name of trade development. At the next cabinet meeting, the president's tone was harsh. "This is not mere resistance, this is revenge. And now we will not only defend, we will trace the roots of the truth completely." Around the same time, another major revelation shook the country. A former minister confessed through secret recordings that a clandestine group composed of military officers, media personalities, and businessmen had been operating under the name National Security Restoration Council. Its purpose was to remove President Traore and restore the old system. This group had been active for months, and from the car bombing to the media campaign, everything was orchestrated under their guidance. The president immediately activated the military court, and under the Anti-Treason Act, operations began. Dozens were arrested, some fled, and some hid inside international embassies. Once again, silence fell over the streets of Ouagadougou, but this was not a silence of fear, it was a silence of preparation. The people now understood that the battle was no longer only about resources, but about ideology. Those who, for centuries, had called slavery progress were now returning in new clothes. President Traore once again addressed the nation. We are not only fighting thieves, but also their ideology. Those who think we are weak, those who think we cannot bear the truth, remember we have defended our land, and now we will defend our dignity. At Colonel Fode's funeral, thousands attended. On his grave was inscribed, "He who mined gold died, he who mined truth became eternal." That line, "He who mined gold died, he who mined truth became eternal," became a declaration for all of Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traore was no longer merely a political leader. He had become a vision, a symbol of struggle, a heartbeat that resonated not just in Burkina Faso, but across the entire African continent. Justice had been served in the courts, the traitors exposed. But this war was not only against crimes, it was against an entire mindset. The mindset that always wanted Africa weak, divided, and dependent. President Traore had now decided, we will not only reclaim our gold, we will reclaim our identity, our dignity, and our sovereignty. On the streets of Ouagadougou, new construction had already begun. The warehouses that once served as smuggling hubs were now being turned into national museums and training centers. In those centers, the new generation was being taught what it means to speak the truth, to stand firm on it, and to resist oppression. The president organized an international conference attended by African heads of state, journalists, educators, young leaders, and human rights activists. At this conference, he presented a charter which he named the Ouagadougou Covenant. The charter declared, every country will hold full sovereignty over its own resources. International investment will only be based on transparency and accountability. All mineral resources will be processed locally. The African nations would provide one another with defensive, economic, and moral support. In the case of any foreign interference, there would be a collective response. This charter was not merely a collection of words. It was signed by Senegal, Mali, Chad, Niger, and many other African countries. A wave of concern swept across the eyes of Europe and the West. For the first time, Africa, silent for centuries, now stood with its voice, its strength, and its principles. During this period, France issued a formal demand for forgiveness. But President Traore gave a short yet powerful reply. We do not want forgiveness, we want justice, and we have taken it. His leadership was not just a source of pride for Burkina Faso, but he had become a guiding light for all those nations that had lost their resources, culture, and freedom under external pressure. His speeches began to be broadcast in international institutions, and the young African generation started calling him the father of African gold independence. 1 year later, when Bilal, the same young man who had carried his grandfather's message to the president, became a member of the National Youth Parliament, President Traore placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "The step you took changed the course of our entire history." In a square in Ouagadougou, where criminals had once been paraded before the people, now stood a magnificent statue. President Traore, one hand holding an envelope, the other a gold bar, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Beneath it was inscribed only one line. We are the generation that lit the lamp of truth in the darkness. This was not just the story of recovering gold. It was the story of a nation awakening, of a leader standing firm, and above all, of the principle that when nations awaken, even the mightiest powers of the world tremble. And so on the land of Burkina Faso, a new dawn rose, after centuries of slavery, theft, and conspiracies, declaring the triumph of African dignity, truth, and courage.